Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out to listen to me speak. Lorraine is going to help me click through the slides here. So I love to be upside down. It's something that I live for. When I had kids with my wife, you don't have so much time. I couldn't participate in gymnastics anymore. I found it very difficult. So as soon as possible, I got back into it. I never really realized when I was young just how much I like to be upside down. And it's maybe not for the reasons that you might assume. It's not because I'm an adrenaline junkie, although I do like running and jumping and things. It's more because for a brief moment in time, for just a fraction of a second sometimes, being upside down feels like I'm in a completely different world. I get a different perspective than the majority of people, and in some respects it feels kind of superhuman. Or a little bit like being in a video game, when you're jumping on a trampoline and doing backflips and chaining a whole bunch of things together. It's a different perspective that not everybody gets. You really develop a certain sense of spatial awareness that actually allows you to see where you're going when you're upside down, unlike when you're tripping or falling. So I've had the pleasure of coaching gymnastics and participating in this sport for about 30 years now. I've coached ages 2 to 75, really excited, rambunctious little 2-year-olds, participating with their parents, up to inspiring 75-year-olds, that can still work their way around a high bar, doing giants and back handsprings and all sorts of crazy stuff I never assumed I would see somebody at 75 doing. Right? I learned a lot about biomechanics, but in an untraditional fashion. I never went to school for that. But going through the movements myself and learning how to coach these movements, taking athletes through these progressions, it really gave me, a leg up, I guess you could say, on the competition for where I would go next. You can switch it. So the start of my career actually ended up in traditional animation, which my parents didn't really support in the beginning. As many of you probably know that are artists, back in the day, it was kind of difficult to see a long future maybe, with a decent paycheck coming through or being able to support a family. So, when you're in high school, you question all of these things. I'm sure students go through that today as well, but my parents were very traditional in that, my dad was an engineer. He had a hard time going through school. He had to pay his own way through school. He was working and going to school at the same time. He didn't want me to have to go through that, so he wanted me to make smart choices in high school, concentrate more on math and more on sciences, and really wasn't comfortable with the idea that I was going to become an animator. Well, my chemistry marks, I think, kind of changed that tune a little bit. Whereas my art marks were, 90s and 100% and that kind of stuff. So my mom kind of tried to convince him. And when the guidance counselor at school really showed him what was available in terms of animation, then he kind of relaxed a little bit. So this is an example of some of the stuff that I was doing professionally. At the end of my 2D animation career, I became a production designer, and I was doing more props and character design and stuff like that. But I had the pleasure of working on a lot of different television commercials. So all of the cereal characters that you had seen, when you're a kid, well, I got to draw those. So I was drawing the honeybee, and I got to draw, the Rice Krispie characters and bring them to life, which was actually really surreal. After about 5 or 6 years, there was a little program called Flash that came out. And suddenly, with the press of a button, everybody could become an animator, or so they thought. So that meant that a lot of the traditional or 2D animation jobs dried up in Toronto, because I'm from Ontario. And it really put things into perspective. You kind of panic because when you're a freelance artist, you're not working full-time, as some of you may know. You're really sometimes doing 2 contracts at once to try and keep things moving. So I figured, well, maybe this isn't really a good career. Maybe my parents were right. And a buddy of mine had just bought this new skateboarding game for the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation had been out for about a year, and it was super popular. And I love skateboarding and snowboarding and rollerblading and all that stuff. So he invites me over, and we're a group of people playing the game, and it was amazing. It was like, oh my God, I need to be doing this with my life. Like, I actually got to control the skateboarder, and I really felt like I was in this world, and I was jumping on these handrails and off these sets of stairs and off of ramps doing crazy stuff that I really could never do in real life. But it was so great. So like, wow, I wonder if I could translate my animation skills into this realm in video games and then get to play with it after, which was exactly what happened. So I went back to school, to Seneca College, for a post-diploma program for about 8 months so that I could learn the 3D software that would be necessary for me to get a job. It was a lot of hard work, but I loved it from the get-go. We all got hired, pretty much the entire class. There was about 21 of us. We all got hired by Ubisoft here in Montreal. They came to the school in Toronto, and they snatched all of us up. Which is something that they still do to this day in the city. Ubisoft is a great place, actually, for junior talent. They do a very good job of training their staff. So over the years, I had the pleasure at Ubisoft of working on a whole bunch of major brands that they have. I got to animate on the Prince of Persia, on Assassin's Creed, on Far Cry games, etc. And it was all fantastic, and I wasn't really thinking, that far ahead that, okay, so I'm going to spend some time here, and then maybe eventually I'm going to try and find a place that's making a skateboarding game or a snowboarding game. Because moving to California, which is where Tony Hawk was made, and where the video game industry was already super huge, that was always in the back of my mind. Like many animators, actually, right from, from traditional animation, a lot of people were thinking about moving to California because that's where Disney was, or DreamWorks, or those big studios. So that was still in the back of my mind. Until one day, I walk into work all groggy after I've done a full week of overtime on Prince of Persia. And who do I see in the hallway but Shaun White? My idol, my snowboarding idol. I was like 30-something, and he wasn't even like 20 yet, and this kid is my idol, right? But I was like, am I seeing things? Is that really him? It's like, it is. Do I ask him for his autograph? What do I do? Just be cool, man. It's all good, Just chill. But then it dawned on me, oh my God, we're making a snowboarding game. Like, this is so surreal. Is this possible? So very quickly, I modeled myself in 3D. I rigged it, which means I put a little skeleton inside of it. I animated it, textured it, and everything. So there was a little virtual me. And I sent pictures and videos of that off to the head of the studio here in Montreal at the time, Martin Tremblay, along with my snowboarding and my coaching resume, and my animation resume, of course, just in case he didn't really know who I was. And within a week, not only did I have a spot on the team, but they made me the animation director, which was a shock. That was all at once, 2 ultimate career goals at once. It makes me very emotional still to talk about it today. I never thought, having started in video games so soon, becoming an animation director for 1, 2, working on a snowboarding game in Montreal, I didn't need to move to California, and 3, with Shaun White, oh my God, So that was pretty fantastic. I was on cloud 9 the entire time. I was literally in a different world. When people talk about, your passion is your life, working with your passion, that was really it. For me, work and snowboarding and everything, that's it. That was it for me. Our producer said, oh, it's snowing out today. Why don't you guys take the rest of the afternoon off and go snowboarding? You guys can, put in some extra hours later. So we'd all pile into our cars or, a carpool off to the mountain, and away we'd go. Which is pretty fantastic. You never really imagined that. Working on the other games, we never saw any of that. It was very, very strict, but our producer was super cool with that. I got to travel all over the world with Shaun White. I got to talk with the press quite often, which was great. We did a few press tours. And then I was invited actually to represent the other games in the brand as well. There was a skateboarding game. There was a couple games that came out for the Wii. I got to meet Jimmy Fallon and Conan O'Brien and that kind of stuff. So it was really, really crazy. And this is in like a period of 2 years. All of this is happening, So my world was like, whew, flipped on its head, but I was super stoked. I didn't want to be anywhere else. And then this is the final product. So I'm just going to talk over it as the video goes. But after the game had been out for a short while, the game was released in about 2008. It came out with mediocre success. When you make snowboarding and skateboarding games, it's very niche. It's not something that we would say the mass market would play. Okay? So that means right away that earnings from a project like this aren't going to be as high as some other games that you'd see, like maybe like an Assassin's Creed, for example. So already the company was starting to be a little bit risk adverse about it. Well, then the Wii game also got shipped, and it was a huge success because they had a peripheral. They had the Wii balance board, and there was another snowboarding game on the Wii, but it wasn't super awesome, and people gobbled up the Shaun White Wii snowboarding game, no problem. So they figured, hey, wow, that worked out really great. How about a year later, we put out another one? And for the Nintendo Nintendo systems, it's a different market than the other consoles. You know, like it's not like a FIFA game where, or a hockey game. Every year you can put out another version with new players and it's going to work. The Wii players were very casual. So putting out this other game so soon was really too soon. Not only that, it was around the same time that the Olympics were coming through. And I don't know if you know about how the Olympic Committee works or around the time that the Olympics are going on, but there's kind of like a media blackout. It's not really the right word, but you're not allowed to have any Olympic tie-ins in your content, in your media, if you haven't paid for it. And Ubisoft was unsure if they really wanted to embark on that journey, so they didn't. So although Shaun was doing press tours and talking about the Olympics and we were demoing the game, it wasn't good enough. We weren't getting the exposure. The game came out too soon. So the brand actually collapsed. That meant that after these wonderful 2 years, my entire world came crashing down. Now it was all of a sudden back to reality. We came into work in the morning, and the head of the studio said, "Sorry guys, that's it. There's no more." We had been spending a year on the second version of the game. We were having a fantastic time. We really didn't see it coming. So all of a sudden, back to reality, my 2 feet back on the ground. Now what was I going to do? I had been living in this dreamland, for the past 2.5, 3 years. So it was time to move on. And I'm actually glad that happened. It really brought me back down to earth. Okay? And it allowed me to concentrate on some other things and to take what I had learned from this experience and move on. So similarly to what I experienced while working on this, we see this a lot in players. There's all sorts of different genres of game out there, right? Typically, when you start playing online, we start to see something interesting happen where players are living in this world, their avatar is super important to them, or their virtual character is super important to them. And they play so much that they also have a hard time coming down from this or coming back into reality. To the point where occasionally you'll get players that are so angry that their character, their avatar gets killed online, that they'll call a SWAT team on the player that killed them. How weird is that, right? Like, how can you not understand that this is a real life impact? They're saying, oh, these people may have hostages. They have a bomb, they told me. And the SWAT has to do due diligence, and they show up, So now there's a whole process around this where, the first party companies, Microsoft and Sony, actually have to really look into it very seriously, very quickly, because the SWAT team will get sent. So if you do a little bit of research on it, you'll see some really sad kids that, have been found out at the end of the day because they couldn't separate their emotion from the in-game into the real world. Okay? We also see another side of it, actually, which is a lot more positive, which is the more modern side of video games and marketing, and it's called esports. Is it really a sport? Who's to say? However, it does attract mass amounts of people. The image here on this slide is from a game called League of Legends, and this is the World Championships. So we have teams from all over the world. League of Legends has teams from all over the world that play constantly online. These teams live in houses. They have coaches and trainers that help work on their reflexes. And these kids, because a lot of them aren't even 18 years old, are playing video games professionally and making a lot of money doing it. At the same time, they'll be streaming, which means that they'll be playing these games live, and they will have a ton of people watching them, and they get sponsors, and these kids are making, over $1 million a year playing video games, which is something brand new, right? So their passion has transformed into a career, which is super positive. It's not something that typically we would have seen in the past, You kind of get into a game and then you get out. That was the point, same as films were. Well, now that's all changing. So again, it's all about escapism. It's all about kind of getting into that experience for a little bit and then leaving it alone. It's like that little bus ride or, on the metro, you're just playing a little bit of Candy Crush, getting your Candy Crush fix in the morning. Or, playing another kind of game, an RPG or something like that, where, you get into the narrative a little bit and then you come back out. Well, all of these things are changing. This is nothing new. This is, something that we've seen in film for years and years and years. And I use The Wizard of Oz as a good example of that because, you enter into this dream world with Dorothy and you believe it. You not only believe in this new world, which is awkward at first because everything is like all these crazy colors and everything, but also in the characters that, join her on her journey. What I find really interesting about this film is that at the end, when you come across the Wizard of Oz, not only for the characters is it a moment like a bit of a reality check, like, what the heck, all this was so fake, like, how's that possible? But it's also a moment for the viewer to kind of be like, okay, cool, and they relax you out of the experience, which I find is really interesting, okay? There's a lot of tools and techniques that you use in film that we also use in game that I'll talk to you a little bit about shortly. But the most important part is about building a world. World building is a term you're going to hear thrown around a lot, and absolutely every brand that is character-based is really jumping on that. Star Wars is a perfect example. Their universe is absolutely massive. Marvel, that's another one. There's a reason why Disney bought them all up. Okay? The idea is that they build this universe, this world, these characters, the lore, the laws, everything that functions, and then they create within that. And they make you believe that it's real, right? How do they do it? Well, they get you immersed. There's a big difference between film and games, which I think is pretty obvious. I think most of you have probably held at least one of these game controllers in your hands over the years. But that's the key. That's the first key that we have in games versus film, and that's that we're giving you control, right? In film, you spectate. The end of the film happens. You have no control. You're watching that horror movie. Jason is behind that girl with the axe, and you're just like, run! Why aren't you running? You're yelling at the screen. Nothing's going to happen. With games, it's a lot more fulfilling. You can make her run, right? Or in some games, you play him, right? So I mentioned a lot of the tools that we use in games that come from film, and one of them is visual language. Now, every discipline has their own definition of what visual language is. For me, I'm referring to film visual language, or really more the idea of concept, the concept of things in movement, moving from one frame to the next and leading your eye, okay? Changing your focus from one thing to another and really pulling you in. Okay? There's a lot of devices that they use. For example, in this shot from 2001 Space Odyssey, where they're using perspective and color and position on the screen really to make you focus in the middle. Very ham-fisted, because at the time, it still was rather new, this whole concept. But Kubrick is one of my favorites because he really reinforced those rules at the time. Now we call them tools, because now we kind of like to break them from time to time. Okay? So in video games, we do the same thing, whether it be, the color of something that we want to bring your eye to this, this tower on a mountain, like a giant visual weenie in the middle of the map, with a giant ray of light that comes down onto it. It's pretty obvious that that's where we want you to go. And while you're going there, we're going to light your path with different colors. You're going to meet different characters. You're going to be able to tell just from their silhouette if they're friend or foe, typically. Then there's a narrative that revolves around all of that as well. So, to close everything up, what I find really ironic is actually the fact that for so long, we were looking towards this media as a way to escape from, our daily lives, the stress, the pressure, a way to pass time, but then you just turn it off and you walk away. Well, now, because of the way that branding is done, we're finding that we don't want you to leave. We want you to remain as part of our world. We not only want you to be watching the films and playing our games and reading our books, we also want you to be, wearing our clothes and be inundated with all this stuff. If you take a look at the algorithms that are running within YouTube and Google, they're feeding you with these things constantly, and that's what they want. They don't want you to come out of their world. They just want you to continue to consume over and over again. So it's really fun every now and again to throw a little monkey wrench in YouTube's plans and just look at something completely random and see what pops up in my feed afterwards, But what's really ironic is the fact that now we actually have to unplug to get back to the real world. We're living in this surreal, invented reality that, we become accustomed to. We accept it. It almost feels normal to us. And you have to unhook from social media, and you have to leave the internet alone. You pretty much need to go to an island now where there's no internet to be able to escape back into your own life. I find it very ironic. So that brings me to the end of my talk. Hopefully you found it quite interesting, my journey through the different careers and everything. If you have any questions for me after the talk, I'd be more than happy to chat with you. Thank you very much.